have the opportunity to moderate this panel tonight. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about ILCHEP, a little bit about our panelists, a little bit about the purpose of this series. And then I have the easy job of turning it over to the iconic Sandra Brown and the inspiring Jahari Jabir and letting them share their brilliance with all of us tonight. So I'm going to say my piece and then I'll do my best to get out of the way. I do want to, again, welcome everyone. And I want to encourage folks, if you feel comfortable, if you'd be willing to give an introduction in the chat, if you'd be willing to share your name, your gender pronoun, and maybe the organization or institution you're with, and location, because we are trying to start making connections across the state of Illinois. And so it'd be really great to see where are folks showing up from virtually tonight. So if you could do name, pronoun, organization, and location, however you want to define that, would be wonderful. And so just to remind everyone, we are gathered together tonight for the first event in a 4-part virtual series titled Education Across the Prison Walls, a call for reflection and action. And this series is being organized by the Illinois Coalition for Higher Education in Prison. We go by ILCHEP for short. And ILCHEP is a coalition of programs and educators who are dedicated to providing quality higher education opportunities for people who are incarcerated in prisons in Illinois, in jails as well. And so we strive to support our students as they build meaningful lives and prepare for a successful future in civic life. And equally important, we encourage public dialogue and action to reduce the state's and country's reliance on incarceration. So my name is Ches Rumpf. I use she, her pronouns. I teach at Benedictine University. I'm part of the steering committee for ILCHEP, and I've been able to be part of the planning committee for education across the prison walls. I want to introduce some of my other partners on the planning committee. Heather Kenuel, who is here and has done an amazing job of outreach. I know so many of you on the registration form said you're here because of Heather. So thank you, Heather, for your vision and your outreach and in connecting us. I also want to acknowledge Larry Barrett and Sarah Ross, both who can't be here with us immediately. They have other obligations, but they have done a lot of heavy lifting behind the scenes to make tonight happen. We have some other ILCHEP steering committee members who are here as well. Christina Rivers, who teaches at DePaul and has done incredible work at Stateville for a number of years. And Chris was the one who made it possible for me to start teaching inside. So I always give Chris a shout out for that. I also want to introduce Flor Esquivel, who is our administrative director with ILCHEP and is just a force who holds it all together. And Anthony Bryant, who is our communications coordinator and has done so much heavy lifting behind the scenes with no recognition, again, to get everyone here. So I want to thank and acknowledge those people. I have so many more people to thank. I'm going to keep it quick. I want to thank Adler University and specifically their Institute on Public Safety and Social Justice. ILCHEP is a part of the IPSSJ. And so I want to thank Elena Quintana and Matt Barrington in particular for all of their work to make tonight possible. And last but not least, we have 2 incredible ASL interpreters who started working the minute they signed in tonight. So Shannon Morrison is here and Jess Yoakum. And so you will see them switching off. I want to thank you both for being here and helping us with this event. And the last acknowledgement I want to give is to Illinois Humanities. Their Envisioning Justice grant is what is making tonight possible. And so just deep gratitude to Illinois Humanities. I've seen some Illinois Humanities folks sign on. So thank you for your support. Thank you for being here tonight as well. And just to note, the event is being recorded, as you probably saw. And we will have it posted and we'll be sending out information later to make sure folks are able to access that link. So with all of that being said, For those of you that are maybe just signing in, if you haven't yet, if you could put name, pronoun, your organization, and where you're from, like location that you're zooming in from, if you could put that into the chat. And now is a great time for me to start to transition because Cedric, welcome. I see Cedric has joined us as well. And so we have three incredible panelists who are here with us tonight. And before I introduce them, I want to just give a little bit of context for this overall education across the prison walls series. You probably know, we certainly have recognized at ILCHEP that higher ed in prison has changed really dramatically over the past 15 years or so, since some of the first official programs in Illinois started doing this work inside. And so we're noticing more and more college programs are reaching people who are incarcerated throughout our state. But that availability of programs still remains uneven across the state in terms of who actually has access to education in prison. And students and educators continue to grapple with restrictions that challenge the liberatory potential of critical education. We also know that Pell Grants are coming back for incarcerated students, which raises so many exciting possibilities for growth, but also concerns about how universities will view this resource and the types of programs that universities may develop. And so at ILCHEP, we were really recognizing that these tensions suggest Illinois has reached a critical moment for higher education in prison. And we feel that the decisions we make today will significantly shape higher ed in prison for years to come. And so this series is a response to that critical moment. We're gathering tonight and three more convenings where we are going to be featuring educators, students, and organizers who have been and remain committed to expanding the reach of liberatory education in prison and in our communities. And so the first objective throughout this series is we want to foster critical reflection and discussion because there are tensions, because there are so many important issues to be addressing right now and thinking through. But we also want to foster collaboration. We want to make sure universities and organizations are connected to one another so that we can actually expand the reach of programming and make sure that it truly is critical education with a liberatory goal. So thank you for being here. Thank you for responding to our call. And I now have the great honor of introducing our three distinguished panelists tonight. We have two students, excuse me, and an educator, an associate professor who are joining us. I'm going to do a quick introduction with bios, and then I will facilitate some prepared discussion questions, and then we will have time for questions from the audience. And if you want to, it might be good if you could hold the questions until we open it up, and then I'll give people a chance to put them in the chat, just so we're not too distracted with too much activity. But the first panelist joining us tonight, I am so thrilled to welcome Sandra Brown, who is an incarcerated survivor at the Fox Valley Adult Transitional Center in Aurora, Illinois. Currently, Sandra is a visiting scholar with the amazing Women's Justice Institute, and Sandra is also a doctoral student at California Coast University. She is the first incarcerated woman in Illinois history to earn a master's degree while incarcerated, and the second incarcerated woman to earn the Davis Putter Scholarship. Sandra is also a published poet and essayist whose body of works are included in Critical Storytelling, From Behind Invisible Bars, Undergraduates and Inmates Write Their Way Out. And upon release, Sandra aspires to engage in teaching, advocacy, and public speaking in ways that promote social justice for justice impacted women. And beyond aspiring, Sandra, you're already doing that. So way to do it. We also are joined by Dr. Johari Jabir, who is a musician and scholar. He's also a native of St. Louis, Missouri. And Johari began piano lessons at an early age and was immersed in the expressive culture of St. Louis's Black working class religious community, which is the foundation for his continued practice as a musician, cultural historian, and contemplative teacher. Johari is currently director of music at St. George and St. Matthias Episcopal Church in Chicago. He's enjoyed an extensive career in church music and musical theater, including serving as associate conductor of the 1991-1990 Broadway revival of The Wiz. His research, teachings, and writings include prison abolition, religion and spirituality in the African Black diaspora, Black music and social transformation, and contemplative pedagogy and public education. His first book, Conjuring Freedom, Music and Masculinity in the Gospel Army of the Civil War, is a cultural history of the nation's first Black regiment, the 1st South Carolina Volunteers. Conjuring Freedom attends to the spirituals sung by the regiment and the ring shout as a mode of conjuring the spirit for military aims.
Wow.
Yeah. Johari is an associate professor of Black Studies at UIC, and he has taught numerous classes at Stateville Correctional Center through the Prison Neighborhood Arts Project, better known as PNAP. So Johari, thank you so much for being here. And I am just absolutely thrilled to also see Cedric X. Kell. Cedric, thank you for being here. I know you have moved mountains to be here tonight. Your presence means so much. Cedric came from generational poverty. He is a descendant from sharecroppers who migrated to the north and was raised on the west side of Chicago. When he was 17 years old, he was wrongfully convicted and served 28 years of a juvenile natural life sentence. While in prison, Cedric became a student and follower of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad under the leadership of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Cedric took classes under Dr. Margaret T.G. Burroughs in poetry, as well as many other college courses in business management, marketing, communications, American history, the Poor People's Movement, Latin American history, and many more. I also want to note Cedric recently contributed to this amazing book celebrating the work of Dr. Margaret T.G. Burroughs and Our Girl Tuesday and Unfurling for Dr. Margaret T.G. Burroughs. So I just wanted to acknowledge that work as well. Cedric now works in the Nation of Islam Prison Reform Ministry and goes to school at Daly College for Advanced Manufacturing. If just join me, please, in welcoming these three incredible people. So very thrilled to have you here and can't wait for the discussion that it will follow tonight. And so we're gonna transition to some questions with panelists. And the first question to get us going, as I shared these in advance, and so Sandra, Johari, and Cedric, whoever wants to start first would be great. But the first question is, how would each of you characterize liberatory pedagogy? Is this something you have experienced or encountered in your own learning and education?
Ladies first.
Okay, well, allow me then, please, thank you. Well, literatory pedagogy, to me, implements cultural responsiveness in the development, implementation, and evaluation of educational curricula with respect to the totality of one's learning experiences. Now, I have experienced the liberatory pedagogies of privileged cultures, and by that, I mean that my learning experiences consisted of what the dominant privileged cultures teach. So as a Black woman, I have learned glimpses of what constitutes African-American history, for example. During the shortest month of the year Americans come together collectively to celebrate what is considered the elite in Black history. We have Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., and Malcolm X, to name a few. Occasionally, I would get to sing the Black national anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. But the stories of how this country was built on the backs of those most afflicted by injustice and oppression were rarely, if ever, told, much less included. I mean, for the other 11 months of the year, I learned about the accomplishments of white men and women. I learned how to aspire to white ideologies of success. And through subliminal messages, I grew up in an educational environment that worked to internalize the greatness of whiteness while ingesting their narratives of Blackness. Not surprisingly, if we fast forward, The same experiences prevail behind our prison walls. Programming that truly frees incarcerated people and drastically reduce recidivism are either restricted or denied. Learning content and pedagogy is either scrutinized and controlled in the interest of security and public safety. Individuals in custody have little to no access to technology, kind of similar to the enslaved having little to no access to reading material. And we know that technology today is a vital tool in accessing education. I feel like together these barriers leave justice impacted men and women ill-equipped to thrive in today's society. And so when we speak about cultural responsiveness in liberatory pedagogy, I think that cultural responsiveness should also include the narrative of those impacted by the justice system.
Wow, Sandra, you said so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Cedric, do you want to take the baton? What is, how would you characterize liberatory pedagogy? And welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank all y'all for being here. Thank you for allowing me this platform to share my story. Appreciate the scholarship of Sister Sandra. She definitely inspired me with her words. Hearing her story as well as inspired me, because when I got incarcerated right before the Bill Clinton bill was passed, and I was waiting for the Pell Grant to come back to start school. And once that Pell Grant was passed, that stopped my college education. So I couldn't have opportunity to get a master's on the Schultz's degree. I like this quote what Amos Farrakhan stated. He stated that true prison reform starts with the enlightenment of the inmate of who the inmate is in reality, and not what he or she has become because of circumstances. The true prison reform reconnects the soul to its creator and begins to provide these human needs. And then we see the change in attitude in that inmate that leads to behavioral change. I want to say that because education is a human need. And that human need has been denied to prisoners. And me being denied formal education, I became inspired like Malcolm X once I heard the message on Elijah Muhammad to learn. So I knew when I was in grammar school, I didn't even know African history. I didn't even know a continent in Africa. I remember in Black History Month, like she was referring to, they put the African map up and we had to pick names of countries and say the names of those 54 countries in Africa. And they gave me Niger. And when I looked at Niger, I was kind of reluctant to say it because I didn't know how to pronounce it. And so I said nigger. And she quickly corrected me. She was a Caucasian woman, but I was so ashamed because I didn't know a continent of my homeland or a country's name in my own homeland. And I was in the 8th grade at this time. And I had no recollection of African history. And when I got to prison, the beauty of the teaching of Elijah Muhammad is that it's rooted in teaching us the history of ourselves way before we came on the hulls of ships. And so liberatory pedagogy gotta be included into liberating our minds from the indoctrination of white supremacy in the lens in which our history was taught through white supremacist lens. So all our history that's taught about African history never talks about before Columbus. Our history begins with teaching us about when we came in contact with Caucasians and they brought us over here on slave ships, and slavery is the beginning of our story. Like we didn't have no recollection of our contribution to civilization before we came in contact with white civilization. And so it's very important that in liberatory education that history is given, the history of our struggle, the history before Columbus. Because these things have given me foundational tools that now I can go into any room and present myself with pride and knowing that I have self-respect, self-dignity, and self-love. Because once I got introduced to these type of teachings, it gave me the confidence to know that my people contributed to the on march of civilization. And when you go into prison context and you've been denied education, because I had natural life sentence, you couldn't even get a GED with natural life. You the last person on the list. So basically, luckily I got my GED as soon as I got incarcerated in county jail. I got my GED within 4 months of incarceration. And so when I came to prison, they took schools out of prison. And so it was a blessing that PNAP was able to come into the prison system in 2011. And so once they got into this prison system, I already had a foundation of learning. And so they introducing college courses to us. And a lot of college courses that you were expressed in what I took in came out of PNAP, because the collectives of teachers that came from the universities in Chicago came to Stateville, and they inspired us and gave us this platform where I had certifications from them, and I got that college experience for these college teachers. I got college credits because of my interaction with PNAP in prison. And so by the grace of God, I was blessed to come out of prison last year. I just recently got out of prison. I'm fresh out. I got out last year, July, for 28 years for a wrongful conviction sentence. And they let me out due to me being a juvenile. And I was incarcerated since I was 17. And by the grace of God that I was able to survive that environment and taking hold to those lessons that example that Malcolm X gave in his incarceration. And so again, the liberatory regatta starts with that. And when we go into these prisons to bring these type of education to brothers and sisters incarcerated, that they should have that view of history introduced to them so they can get the confidence. Because if you can't see yourself in education, you don't want to really be educated. And that will happen to a lot of children in grammar schools. If you can't see yourself in what you're learning, you don't want to be a part of it. And so that happened to me. And so now that I see myself in education, because the true root medium of education to bring out what is already within. So the things that we learning and being taught about that's already in us. It just have to be brought out. And so I definitely appreciate this platform, and I hope I didn't take too much time expressing those are the key points. Thank you.
Oh, that was incredible. And I'm already just hearing so much resonance, Sandra and Cedric, between, you know, this notion of the intentional erasure, right, of culture, of history, of peoples, and, you know, liberatory pedagogy being tied to reclaiming and visibility. And I just really wanted to point that out. It's such a strong, I think, resonance between what you both said. And Jahari, I know you have so much more to add, so I'm happy to turn it over to you in terms of how you would characterize liberatory pedagogy.
Well, I first want to say I wish everyone here present in the room grace, peace, and power on this most important work. It's so lovely to see Comrade Sandra and Comrade Monica. Sister Sandra never fails to inspire, so thank you. And Brother Cedric, I'm gonna sound like an echo because you've already unknowingly spoke to what was on my mind in my response to the question that a liberatory pedagogy method or art of teaching has to be one of mutuality that understands that what we're doing in education and prisoners are not who they are. The prison is the structure. And so we have to challenge ourselves to punk the language. Or if that's offensive, you know, we have to challenge ourselves to decolonize the language. And so we are on a journey of accompaniment as teachers with our learning partners. And I take as an example the fugitive ethics of revolutionary abolitionism, of the enslaved Africans who understood that another life is possible. And understanding that always keeps me grounded in the sense that the liberation or freedom of the fugitive is not in the hands of the abolitionists, but what we are involved in is a collaborative project of self-emancipation. That the space is the space of structure, is the result of social forces of inequity, but none of us is the mere sum of our circumstances. So a liberatory pedagogy has to be grounded in that radical mutuality. But it also presents an ethical paradox for many of us, like myself, who work for these university structures, in the sense that what should not happen in the way of liberatory pedagogy is merely a replication of the university structure into the carceral context. For it is, and it has been my experience, that at some point it has been the education systems and their reliance on a carceral logic that has forced many of my learning partners in the carceral context into that context. And so those structures, they have to be decolonized, and we have to practice a kind of contemplative thought about what we do so that we don't impose more punitive judgment and measures in this carceral context. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jahari. I think, yeah, I don't even know what to say, but I really appreciate the intentionality that you're noting there about this notion of carceral logic, and that doesn't just exist in the prison. And so the importance for students and educators to disrupt that, together.
Jess, can I just say one more thing that I
Please.
that actually, when I survey all of the social institutions of America, the church, the university, all of them have this carceral logic embedded in them. And it requires a reflexive mindfulness to see how it's operating. And it is also a challenge, and I think this is in one of the later questions, but it is also a challenge for our students, because one can be convinced that the project of higher education is to recuperate that which failed on the outside. So it is also, this is why it is a mutual accompaniment partnership, so that we are in conversation about, well, what we're not doing in the way of education is to render you needing to be redeemed through that mode, right? So, so yeah, that I forgot to say that.
Thank you for adding that. Yeah, so incredibly important. I'm going to move us forward, because part of my role is paying attention to time. Although I know there's so much we all could say in response to what you've offered already, Sandra and Cedric and Jahari. But I think this connects, especially Jahari and Sandra, as you were talking about, like what was left out of education, like even before, being in prison and in a prison classroom, like all the things that are left out of our curricula, which I think connects to this carceral logic that Jahari is talking about. But right now across the country, we're again experiencing this backlash on critical race theory and ideas that come out of a liberatory education, right? So as you've spoken to, there's the challenges of getting that into prison, and we're seeing a backlash on the outside, right, to those models and theories and that type of education. So why are these critical theories needed now more than ever? And why is it important to teach in prisons? And whoever wants to start, I'll ease back.
guess I'll go for them first. I guess I'll take the turn this time. Um, I think it's sad to say that it's severe opposition because I forget what European leader said that he said that if you repeat a lie for so long, the lie becomes the truth. And so humanity has been lied to about the history of Black people. And so now we have, from that being such a paradigm for we talking about hundreds of years. So to undo that is going to be severe opposition. So because people benefit for us being at the bottom. And so now when you got people challenging this, so this is what Marcus Garvey was to us. This is what Elijah Muhammad was to us. This was Noble Drew Ali. This is what these people was to us. W. Du Bois, these type of leaders. This is what they was to us because they challenged the narrative. Even our Black historian, Black scholars like J.A. Rogers, Chancellor Williams, all these men came forward and challenged the narrative of, the white supremacist paradigm, the matrix of oppression, by bringing true history and true historical facts of contribution to Black civilization. Because like a lot of people don't even think Egypt's in Africa because haven't we been taught? But Egypt is an African country. And so I believe that the opposition is severe because just like, Elijah Muhammad had taught Malcolm X in prison, it's severe opposition to even get literature from the Nation of Islam in prison. It's hard. It's from some prison, you can't even get a Final Call newspaper. You can't even get, our books is being suppressed. So it's suppression from brothers even getting some type of books. A lot of books from historians I just named, J.A. Rogers, Chancellor Williams, a lot of their books on the ban list. They can't even get into the prison. So it's severe opposition to correcting a historical error. It's not a mistake, it's an error because this was done intentionally. And so it's very critical that this be addressed. And it gotta be attacked. So it's good that we have different organizations coming forward and trying to challenge the this type of matrix of oppression, because it must be challenged and it must be changed, so that only way we can get true equality, true respect of each other as people is that we got to have a true introduction to people's contribution to civilization. And I believe that once humanity give a true introduction to our role in civilization, us being the first people on the planet that gave civilization to humanity, that once they really see that and understand that, they will get a more sense of a true equal rapport, and it'll be a just, more society can come out of that. Because for some people, they think when we affirm our history, it's an affront to them, or we trying to attack them, which we are not trying to do. All we trying to do is saying that, like Martin Luther King said, I'm a man too. So let me express my manhood and what I am. It's not to belittle your manhood or your contribution to civilization. I just want you to respect mine and respect my people's contribution to civilization. And let's work together and build an ongoing march on civilization in a just and equal society.
Thank you so much, Cedric. Sandra, Jahari?
Thank you for that, Cedric. Well said. Thank you.
Yeah.
For me, now more than ever, critical race theory needs to be taught in our schools and in our prisons. I mean, just recently, I delivered a presentation using the lens of this country's historical narrative to demonstrate that in 2021, there is nothing new under the sun. Since the inception of America's most fundamental institutions, groups of privilege have weaponized education against marginalized groups in order to promote mass enslavement and oppression. I mean, from Black slaves to women, to certain groups of immigrants, to today, prisoners. Oppression continues to run rampant in the land of the free. If we really think about it, dirt plantations are replaced now with concrete ones called prisons. The criminalization of educating slaves is
The other day, I'm so motherfucking thirsty.
Sandra, I think we might have lost you. Oh no, Sandra, I hope you come back.
No bueno.
No, no. I'm wondering, Jahari, do you want to jump in
Oh,
while
yeah,
we're maybe waiting for?
Sure, I'm good. Thank you, Cedric. I sort of continue to follow you. I appreciate it. One of the things I think is important as we wrestle with the urgency of a tool or instrument like critical race theory is for us to have clarity around the reality that this society cycles through a constant repertoire of boogeymen, right? It's often socialism, feminism, communism, and right now the boogeyman is, of all things, critical race theory. And I think that clarity is important for a couple of reasons. One being that since its inception, the country has been doing a race theory, and race is what you do. It isn't just what you think, it's what you do. And so it has been doing a race theory grounded in colonial violence and enslavement. And we read the historical narrative of one as progress, which is very deceptive because, for example, the legal end of slavery meant that the slavery problem transitioned to the Negro problem. And the Negro problem gave birth to convict leasing, which is the seedbed for the mass incarceral crisis that we live with. And so that is American history. That's not necessarily critical race theory, but who wants to theorize outside of history, right? You don't have a very powerful theory to do that. So, so those points of clarity, I think, around what is happening and what folks are reacting to, right, is often what they don't even understand. And they are blaming everything about race, everything about the mythologizing of America on critical race theory. And that simply isn't accurate. But for the work we do in terms of higher education and prisons, that historicizing of imprisonment as critical to the history of America is always urgent, because what critical race theory intervenes in is says that that in the very law itself is a racist assumption in the very law. That's what critical race theory reveals. And so as many of our learning partners have become victims of the lies about the neutrality and universality of the law, then it is very important for us to be invested in that form of education as empowerment. But we also have to keep our ears on the ground and know, that and not get swallowed by the kind of utilitarian of what's happening with critical race theory, that people need a boogeyman and we don't have to commit to being that, right? So yeah, I'll leave that for my comments in response to this question.
Yeah, I love the recognition, right, of this repertoire of boogeymen, and it changes, but it's still operating in the same service of power, and thinking critically about how education has and continues to be used in the service of power, whether that's white supremacy and capitalism and all sorts of systems of power. Yeah. And so I think that's a nice segue to the next question. Could either of you, Cedric or Jahari, and hopefully Sandra will be back soon, but could you share a few resources that have been important to your teaching and learning inside, and why, right? Because it's not just that like education is the same or just doing like there's a way we do education, right? And so especially for folks that want to participate in critical education and liberatory pedagogy, are there some resources that have been important to your teaching and learning, and why?
Well, I can say what students have responded to, they have overwhelmingly responded positively when I've used James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time. And Cedric, one of my favorite sections in that essay is when he talks about the beautiful and powerful work that the Nation of Islam does in terms of the social services for Black people. So students have responded very powerfully to that. And recently, I've been turning more attention to the topics of trauma and restoration. So I've used a book by a Buddhist thinker, Lama Rod Owens, called Love and Rage: Liberation Through the Path of Anger. I've also used a book by Resmaa Menakem, My Grandmother's Hands. And these books deal more with healing and trauma. And I've used those texts specifically in a class I continue to teach on the beloved community, because I want our learning partners inside to always be reminded that they are included in that framework of the beloved community. It is not me, the guy outside who is virtuous, coming inside to do that, but it is we that is at stake.
Thanks so much. I just want to say, Sandra, we see you. We're so happy you're back. Cedric, I'll let you take it away, and then Sandra.
No, let Sandra speak, because we're missing her energy.
Sandra, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we got you. Welcome back.
Yes, I am speaking from, for some reason, I guess connections, something happened with the library. So I was just cut off completely. You said we've moved on to question 3?
Yes, but if you wanted to finish what you were saying in response to question 2, I'm sure we all would love to hear it.
Well, thank you so very much. I was talking about how how important critical race theory is important in the implementation of education in our schools and in our prisons. And I was saying that justice, it can't happen in our courts if those who are able to administer justice do so from perspectives adopted by those who enjoy the privilege of race and class. Educational empowerment, likewise, cannot happen in our schools if they continue to operate under the auspices of the digital divide. We have separate but equal schools even today, and racial cliques that are disguised as clubs and fraternities. We can wish ideally that such practices no longer existed, but as an educator and a student, I have seen those differences reflected in underserved communities and in every prison in which I've been housed during my sentence. I am extremely excited now that Northwestern University is beginning to implement a bachelor's degree program in Logan Correctional Facilities. But I mean, there's still so much more to be done in women's institutions. After the cessation of FAFSA eligibility for prisoners, education in women's prisons taught us how to cook, clean, plant, and sew. And if we look again at through the historical lens, those were the same courses that women were allowed to learn when we were first allowed to even begin going to school. Liberatory education must proceed and progress within the prison walls through higher education programs if we are ever to address the issue of collective injustice. And I say this because everyone pays tremendously when education is seen as a privilege rather than a necessity and is treated as such. Economic inequalities will continue to oppress groups classified by the privileged as other without the equal distribution of opportunity. As the weaponization of education is intentional, so must the liberation of education be intentional.
Mm-hmm.
And that was where that was how I felt about the critical race theory question.
I'm sorry, you moved into number 3 about the resources.
Yeah, and I think so, so I'm so glad we're back to finish that, right? Because it's so incredibly important and you're getting love in the chat, about it too. But for you and Cedric, what Johari had started to do was to share some of those resources that have actually been important in your teaching and learning, right? So kind of acknowledging what you all have shared about critical pedagogies and liberatory pedagogies. So question 3, right? What are some resources that have been particularly important in your learning and education, and why?
Well, for me, I relied heavily on correspondence programs. My ineligibility to earn days and the length of my sentence locked me out of most educational and vocational programs inside. The Women and Family Services Division at Lincoln Correctional Center, it was instrumental in helping me traverse my educational path. Some people on this panel, they know her, Miss Sharon Fitzer. This woman would help me however she could with any research material. She helped me find scholarship information, and at times would even help me with textbook donations. During my graduate studies at CSUDH, an advisor mailed me a Davis Putter scholarship application when I was almost unable to complete my master's degree because I could not find the funding. Were it not for those women who believed in me enough to help me, I may not be where I am now. Ohio University's college program for the incarcerated was also pivotal in my educational journey, as it is one of the very few higher educational institutions with degree programs that address specifically the challenges that are commensurate with being an incarcerated learner. My master's degree alma mater no longer offers print correspondence programs, which unfortunately did a huge disservice to the 800 incarcerated students that it used to serve throughout the country. Now, I'm hopeful that they're collaborating with other organizations to facilitate a return of the services to those students in prison. Currently, right now, California Coast University is where I'm completing my doctoral studies right now. Because of them, I am the first incarcerated female in Illinois admitted into an academic doctoral program. And to date, I don't know of any other higher ed institutions that offers this opportunity in an academic discipline to incarcerated learners. So for me, those were the resources personally that have helped me along the way.
Thank you, Sandra. And I love the reminder that as big as these systems are, and as oppressive as these institutions are, that people matter, right? That personal connection and people finding a way really matters. So thanks for reminding us about that. Cedric, I can't wait to hear what resources are at the top of your list that have been personally meaningful and helpful.
Well, there was a culture in the maximum prison that I was in that it was each one teach one. And so what they have done, the elder brothers that was around that was conscious of the movement and was going on, the civil rights movement, that knew about the liberation movement, the Black liberation movement, they was having classes in prison and they was giving us books to read. And so the first book I read was the autobiography of Malcolm X. And that book lit a fire in me. I seen myself in Malcolm. I always go back to Malcolm X because he's the greatest example of a person get out of prison and become in a position he is in history because he was taught, given a teaching almost on Elijah Muhammad. So his book is very critical in my development. Once I read his autobiography, I started getting the books that he read that he was quoting in the autobiography. I started reading those books. So I started reading J.R. Rogers, 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro, Superman the Man. I started reading Chancellor Williams. I had started reading all these Black historians, these Black scholars that helped. And there was another brother, The Message to the Black Man definitely was my blueprint in prison. I read Message to the Black Man, Fall of America, that was my spiritual foundation. And I was introduced to a Black psychologist, Naeem Akbar. And once I got his book, Know Thyself, Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery, The Community of Self, Life for Ancient Africa. Once I got his books, he started dealing with, the psychological problems that, being up under oppression and slavery in his book, Visions for Black Men. Those books was very critical to my development. And so those foundational tools for me to heal the things of the past and giving me a proper lens of dealing with Black inferiority complex from growing up as a child in the inner cities and being in institutions that was rooted in the race theory of white supremacy. And so from being in those institutions, it gives you a Black inferiority complex and it gives whites a white superiority complex. And so once I got introduced to this Black scholarship, it helped deal away with my inferiorities, thinking that my skin is my sin, that my features was ugly. So I fell in love with myself, truly fell in love with myself. I know I'm handsome, I know that I come from a beautiful people. And so that confidence goes a long way because you only value yourself about what almost Farrakhan teaches us. You only value yourself how much you know about yourself. And so once I seen my value in myself from the things I learned about myself, it produced that self-pride, that self-love, and that self-respect, and that self-dignity. And so I didn't devalue myself any longer. And so with those as my stomping grounds, once I came into contact with PNAP, they were just, sharpening the iron that was already being sharp by now I can get back into that type of education and not lose myself and know the role of getting those education premiums. So PNAP was very critical. They was a loving group of teachers. They definitely they have very good affinity with the Black community. Is whites, Blacks, Latino teachers from the LGBTQ community. All of them is involved in the PNAP and to be and to have that collective coming into Stateville because education was dead in Stateville. There was no education. All they had was GED program. So my education came from being self-taught and being around brothers who took the responsibility in prison because I took that same responsibility when I was in prison of each one teach one. And so that's where our first collective came from fellow prisoners. And PNAP, man, they came through and they gave us back the educational policies. And so when they came back with the education principles of colleges, they had severe opposition from the administration because they feel when you serving prisoners that you are a threat to the institution. And so they was banned. Margaret T. Belrose, she was banned from prison several times for coming in volunteering, just teaching us poetry and art. And blessed that she know people in political arenas that was able to get her back into the prison. So I appreciate what PNAP has done, but most definitely, I definitely give honor to those brothers who took responsibility in prison that they want better for their community and they use their wisdom to inspire change in a lot of us in prison. And that's where my teachings came from mostly.
Wow, thank you so much, Cedric. Thank you so much. So just for the audience members, we are going to move into Q&A shortly. So if you have some questions percolating, start getting them ready. But Cedric and Sandra, this specifically is for you, but Jahari, I bet you would have things to say also. But can education emancipate from behind bars? I mean, you've spoken to that a little bit, but if you want to say more. And what does one do with such transformative experiences when you're serving a life or a long sentence? And I know, Cedric, you were speaking about that, like how that was a way to prevent your access to education, right? The length of sentence. So yeah, what can people do? What does one do with such transformative experiences when they are facing life or long sentences?
It's sad that the longer your sentence is, the harder it is for you to get into educational programs. And it's funny because in a Mexican prison, majority everybody got long sentences. But then you bring people into the prison dynamic who might be parole violators or they have a lesser sentence and they transition to another prison. They have access to all the educational programming before anybody, when the majority of the prison population have long-term sentences. And so it's very hard to get that. And it's sad that when brothers now just trying to get clemency hearings, I was just at a brother clemency hearing. He don't have too many certificates because of he had a long sentence, but they see his rehabilitative qualities because he did a lot of things to show he rehabilitated by becoming a peer counselor and taking correspondent courses. So a lot of prisoners with long-term sentences, a lot of them take correspondent courses, and they was trying to outlaw that for a moment because they was trying to educate themselves. And so it's very sad that that such severe opposition and suppression against higher education for prisoners with long-term sentences, when they know that people with long terms, they had the lowest recidivism rate. And then the more education you have, the less likely you recidivate. So why would you not support education program for all prisoners, regardless of what sentence they have? Because according to the law, eventually everyone in prison is going to get out. So it's best that you do everything in your power to try to help them better themselves, improve themselves, restore them back to society, that they can be productive citizens of society. And so I'm a testament to education in prison because I had natural life. And so when I was able to get the education that I received, you can see that I'm being productive out of prison. And I have no intention of going back to prison, even though I was in prison for something I didn't do. So that's even more a problem. But from being out of that environment, I came out of a dark environment that I still hold in my light and my dignity, and that now I'm out here trying to be a role model to the brothers back, try to be a light for the brothers back, and be a light to society because of the misnomer of people got out of prison. Because when one person does something who got out of prison, it's like it's a blanket judgment, everybody get out of prison. So, but they never highlight the success stories of all the people that get out of prison and they become productive contributors to society. So it's very critical that that education be given to brothers and sisters incarcerated.
Thank you so much, Cedric. Sandra, do you want to respond?
Yes, please. Thank you. I feel like education is critical to the emancipation of brothers and sisters from behind bars. I mean, as cliche-ish as it sounds, knowledge really is power. If it wasn't, why would there be so many barriers to getting it? Transformative education occurs through multiple avenues. While academic empowerment is one primary part of rebuilding and reclaiming my life, theater has also been an instrumental part of that process. I mean, my 10+ years of service as president of Toastmasters, A Woman's Voice, was equally integral in my path to holistic development and transformation. And I've watched that transformation take place with other women who were blessed, for that opportunity. Combined, those experiences helped me personally discover who I am, what I have to offer, the nature of my purpose, how to advocate for the right to move in my purpose, and why it matters. Not only in relation to my personal vision for my life, but also in relation to my professional purpose to positively impact humanity through education and social activism. What does one do with such transformative experiences with life or long sentences ahead of them? I mean, up until recently, many have argued that such experiences do little to impact those serving lengthy or life sentences, but nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, lifers and long-timers cultivate change and empowerment in environments designed for erosion and debilitation. We are the people who know the intricacies and the nuances inside, the type of atmospheric pulse, so to speak. We know how to most navigate and circumvent those that would hinder the mission to return to society as transformed individuals prepared to make a difference while we're making a living. We are the ones who serve as helpers and guides to those returning sooner than we will. And in so many cases, we serve as examples to those who are struggling to come to terms with their time. To see how we have transformed our lives, irrespective of our sentences, encourages those with whom we serve to do likewise. Because the running argument right now is that neither corrections nor higher ed can secure the resources and funding required to develop lasting and empowering programming. It would behoove both to pour resources into educating lifers and long timers, as we offer a plethora of untapped resources and can keep programs operational when traditionally relied upon resources are scarce or inaccessible. But even more important than that, let's return to what my brother Cedric said about how almost everyone is coming out of the system. Roughly, I think 96% of the incarcerated population in this country have outdates. So if we continue to enslave those inside by incarcerating them and locking them away from an education, we're actually incarcerating society as a whole, because now we are those people who are coming back either better or bitter. We're going to be somebody's neighbor. We're going to be somebody's employee. We're going to be in the community. We're coming home to a community near someone. And the question remains, how do we want incarcerated or justice impacted people to return? When we return, because we've served so long that we're too old or too sick to work, we're now relying on government assistance, which is still taxing John and Josephine and Q taxpayer. And these are people who have 9 times out of 10 been housed well beyond any threat they may pose to the public. So it's actually costing in the long run to ban liberatory education on the inside. By promoting it on the inside, we free everybody on the outside. And that's whether we're doing time or not.
Yes, 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 yes. So I want to open it up for questions from the audience, since we're getting close to about almost 6:10 at this point. If you have a question, if you wouldn't mind putting it in the chat, and I will do my best to monitor and make sure everyone has a chance to jump in. And while we're waiting for some questions to come in, the final kind of pre-planned question for the panelists, and you've spoken to this in different ways, but what are barriers to this kind of liberatory education? Is it educators themselves, students, the prison, a little bit of everything? So again, I know you've spoke to some of this already, but if there's anything more you would want to say about barriers to this type of liberatory education.
I will keep this extra brief. I think one of the biggest barriers are lack of resources and funding. We have teachers who want to come into the system. We've looked across the country. There are different programs, Inside Out, the Bard Prison Initiative, the Prison Education Project, Project Rebound. I mean, all over the country, there are different organizations that are working to bring higher ed inside the prisons. But the issue seems to be lack of funding, lack of resources, lack of time. I know in Illinois in particular, I think that there are a lot of policies, IDOC policy that works against liberatory education. There are, for example, I mean, how many of us have the credentials to actually maybe teach some of these courses, but because of our statuses as individuals in custody, we're not allowed to do so, not even under instructor supervision. I think about the wasted talent and the funding that could be saved if we were actually to utilize the resources that we have from within. So I just think it's kind of like a collage of things that serve as barriers, but the biggest ones that stand out to me are resources and funding.
Yeah, I believe like Martin Luther King said that he said in his War Against Poverty campaign that he wanted to end a war because going to war takes away from resources for poor people in inner cities. And so we have all these resources, our taxpayers' dollars going to fight in other countries and develop other countries that they destroy their countries with unjust foreign policies. But they don't have nothing to rebuild their own citizens in this country. And that's the sad thing. So the resources are there, they just not given the resources to help further better the citizens, the forgotten Americans, the people that's been locked up in incarceration. I like what Minister Farrakhan said. He said that crime is the result of unjust social and political policies. And so when you look at crime, you just can't look at it. You can't look at it in a vacuum. Crime came from a result of poverty, lack of resources. Crime is the result of poverty. And so now the majority of people in prison are poor and uneducated. And so it must be resources that's given to prisoners to help them better themselves so they can be productive. And there are great barriers, legislative barriers, and especially IDOC barriers and policies that they have put in place to stop education from coming in prison. And then this idea is fed into the staff that even the staff who's just regular staff members, they oppose programs. They think it's too much work for them to do because they got to escort prisoners to these classes and do security to secure the prisoners while they go on these classes and security the volunteers that come into these prisons. So they oppose rehabilitation efforts as well. And it's very sad. Like I said, the Nation of Islam prison reform ministry is we are being very suppressed. It's hard to get books into the prison. It's hard to get volunteers into the prison. It's hard to even get a newspaper into the prison that is not okay. They even have a lot of books on the ban list that brothers cannot even see, like the books I quoted. A lot of them are banned now that I read in prison that helped me in my development as a man. And I know that majority of the prison population is loyal, is majority Black and Hispanic. And so these books would be very critical to their mental and moral healing. And it's very sad. And then like she said about the teachers, there are a lot of teachers there's a lot of laborers are very in large number want to come into the prison and help in this educational process and helping in this liberatory process, but they are very opposed, and there's lack of resources for them to even come into prison because, you know, especially down in the South in Menard, they had literally no programs at all. None in Menard. Nobody's volunteer even come down there because it's so far away from where majority of the prisoners come from, which is Cook County. And so there's no one able to go down there and to help in the educational process because the lack of resources and the severe barriers that's been placed by the institution itself.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Cedric. And, you know, as I was saying, one of the goals that ILCHEP has is to try to increase the reach and support people in starting programs so that we don't have this as much of this disparity as you're pointing to. Beth Herbert, you had a question in the chat about, is there any type of collected summary of opportunities in IDOC prisons? What I dropped in the chat is the Education Justice Project has been doing that labor of pulling together a directory of, you know, what are the programs that are currently available in Illinois. So that link I put in the chat will take you to their 2021 directory. I don't know, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know of any maximum security prisons in Illinois that have like higher education college courses in them right now. If someone knows otherwise, please correct me.
Stateville is the only one. Stateville is the only one. They got programs now for brothers can get their associates through I think North Project and North Park Project and PNAP. They got DePaul is in there, Northwestern is in there, and they all got associate programs now. Just recently got it. I wish I was able to get an associate's degree. And so they just recently got it like about 2 years ago. And so that's definitely a blessing that now one maximum prison have program for people to get associates.
I am working on a public policy paper right now that is researching Northwestern University's implementation of its degree program at Logan. Now, I'm not sure if Logan is classified as maximum or if it's multi-level because all security levels are there, but they just started implementing a 4-year degree program in general studies. Right now, only 19 women are in attendance. I'm not sure if that's due to COVID, but there are plans to expand that. And I'm sure that PNAP is trying to get in, but I think there's a lot of policy loopholes and stuff they have to overcome. Yes.
Well, on this topic of getting programs started, Sarah Ross, who I gave a shout out earlier tonight, did so much work to make tonight happen. But Sarah posed a question: if a college educator was given a chance to teach a course inside, what's the first kind of topic or class they should teach? And what's one principle they should come into the class with? Jahari, could I put you on the spot to see if you have thoughts about that from the educator perspective, someone who's done this?
Yeah, I think the principle, right, should ethically be in relationship to the person. So I think the people's humanity that we're in a teaching and learning relationship with, I think their humanity is always the urgent need. And so that means a lot of listening. In terms of the first course, I think that would depend on what is already present, to perhaps avoid simply replicating something. One of the things at the end of every course I've taught through PNAP at Stateville, I always conclude with, what other kinds of classes would you like to see? And it inevitably will be, things that are not necessarily in my skill set, but because education in this context is so collaborative in the richest sense, someone else might be able to teach the course. So I think it is always about listening to what is it that our learning partners would like to study.
Cedric, Sandra, do you have a response to, if someone's getting started, what type of classes or topics would you recommend, and what principles should they be bringing into the classroom?
Well, I for one,
Go ahead, sister, go ahead.
I definitely agree that learning and teaching is a collaborative process. As educators, the best educators are the ones who continue learning. And one critical component of learning is learning who our students are and how they learn and what matters to them. I think a lot of that shapes what needs to be brought inside. There should definitely be fundamental courses that raise awareness about what keeps us in the conditions that we're in. I mean, a lot of my undergraduate studies were the humanities and literature. So I understand how history and philosophy shapes the individual and how that individual's journey impacts society as a whole. So those fundamental courses are crucial. But learning who the student is and what they need and what they want to learn is an integral part of the process. So I'm definitely one for bringing in vocational courses, but especially in today's society, where many of the courses, particularly for women, are required in order to escape the pink collar jobs that trap us in low wages and no benefits when we have young mouths to feed. Those jobs require degrees. They require a higher education and training. So we need a lot of that in our facilities today.
Thank you, Sandra. We have a couple more questions, but Cedric, I want to give you a chance to respond to that.
I think they did beautifully on that topic. I think two things they need to be taught is financial literacy. I think that's very critical to them brothers in prison, financial literacy, because we are a community that's been preyed upon financially. And so financial literacy should be a topic of subject that they should be taught. Financial literacy is one. And like she said, vocational programs should be brought back into prison. That's for sure. And I think the attitude and the mindset of teachers should come in, is just respect the humanity of them brothers in prison. They not the circumstances that cause us to be incarcerated. We are human beings that make mistakes, like I said, forgotten Americans. And so if they don't see their humanity and come with that that type of level of respect and the dignity they treat them with. It would be very it'll be a classroom that they'll love to see. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Cedric. And again, there's lots of love in the chat and thank yous for the insightful responses. Marshida Iyulomi. Marshida, I'm so sorry if I messed up your last name. I know you so well and I always mess up your last name. Marshida is the ILCHEP steering committee member and does incredible work all around, but also specifically on the Freedom to Learn campaign. And so Marshida is asking if you all could share the top 3 things you want policymakers to implement to expand education. What would they be?
Top 3 things to expand education. Deal away with the policies that suppress education into prisons. That's one. And that should be taught top down from all the IDOC directors to their wardens, to their staff members, to respect that space where their education in prison is vital to the safety, not only of prisons, but the safety of the society which their prisoners will come back to. So I believe that should be the main one itself, is that policy should be implemented, that they give a healthy respect toward those who are trying to come in prison and deal away with those policies, those barriers that help educate prisoners. 2, resources, of course. There should be that should be part of the there should be legislation passed that put aside taxpayers' money to help teaching prisoners, help organizations that come in prisoners to help educate prisoners. I think that was one of the other things that should be very critical, because a lot of people come in prison coming from donations. It's basically just donations that helping them come in prison. If they don't get donations from taxpayers, a lot of the programs you wouldn't even see in prison, period. So I think there should be some type of it should be, and also it should be done away with is allow anybody, what sentence they have, be allowed to have access to educational programs, even lifetime sentences. They should not be the last on totem pole. If them brothers or sisters want to get educated, they should be allowed the opportunity to join those programs to improve themselves, develop themselves for the better themselves and their family and their community. Those are top 3 I think should be implemented.
Wonderful, wonderful. Jahari or Sandra, as we're coming close to 6:30. I know Heather has a comment and then I'll close us out, but I'd love to hear your policy recommendations as Marshida asked.
Well, I want the policymakers to do a better job of releasing the power of these wardens and these various supervisory roles who add to the kind of petty punitive nature of this context that I feel, something that Cedric said, I've noticed that as somebody teaching in prisons, that they resent the teachers because, you know, they have decided as various prison officials who they think should be allowed access to an education, and they are just replicating the sort of ethics of the society. It's tragic to me, but I wish the policymakers would make clear that they have no right to exercise that over incarcerated persons. I also wish that policymakers would see these spaces and see the miracles of education that happen, because it is as if they assign prison education programs the absolute worst space in that context. And so I wish policymakers had a much more humane approach to their work. And I also wish that policymakers would expand the technological aspects so that I think, as Cedric and both Sandra said, learning the kind of technical literacy is also important. And I know they can't imagine that people will leave, and that's a part of abolition to me, is the end of the carceral reality, right? So, but when people leave that context, they can do so with the skills of technology. And so I think policy folks need a complete revolution in values.
Jahar, you really touched on something. We have some great comments in the chat. People speaking from personal experience about that need to deal with that type of training and pettiness and overall orientation to education. Sandra, I know you have some wisdom to share with us about what you want policymakers to know.
Actually, everyone who spoke about it, it's almost like they were like reading the walls of my mind. We are definitely in agreement with that. I would like for education to stop being treated as a privilege or a means of control or punishment from behind the walls.
Yeah.
So many times, the policies that we have already discriminate or exclude people from education. I for one, waited 6 years to get in a program and could not get in because of my outdate. And then by the time I was short enough to get in it, the program didn't exist anymore. But there's also this practice inside that if you get a ticket and you've had disciplinary actions carried out against you, that part of the punishment is that you can't attend school. You're kicked out for 45 days. If you go to SEG, you can't return to school. Well, if education is the thing that transforms one's thinking, and the thinking transforms the behavior, it seems counterproductive to punish somebody by excluding them from school. So I think that the way we view education and how it is implemented and used as a way to keep people in control, I think would be instrumental in its effectiveness. See that change.
So important. We have just about 3 minutes. Heather, I'm gonna ask you to share your comment that you have.
Sure. I just want to thank everybody for coming today. You're all so inspiring. I want to start with piggybacking on what Cedric said. We have to know the history to know how to make a change. A year ago, Colette and a couple of us with WJ, went down to Alabama, to Montgomery, Alabama. And we were upon the place where the slave ships brought people in and unloaded them. And it was a huge eye-opening experience for me because as a 40-year-old Caucasian woman, I was never taught about that in schools. So in order to know where to go, we have to know the history. We have to realize that in America, which is only a little over 100 some years old, that the walking in lines, the timing, the food, the portion.
Oh, Heather, I think we lost you. Heather, we lost your audio. Yeah, Heather, we can't hear you right now.
And that's incorrect. We want to help open programs and be able to give education. 68% of women in 2013 had a 6th grade education level. So if we can even get the people who are the decision makers to understand that a jury of your peers or an education of your peers is needed, there's a kickback. So let's say Sandra has her master's degree. She may be able to get into Logan to teach interview skills, but because of her background, she's eliminated. So maybe changing these requirements for teachers so that there's a federal kickback because they're hiring an ex-offender, and then there's somebody in the peer group that they respect to learn from. Things of that nature, I think, are super duper. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Heather. I think we heard most of it. I turned off your video because we were having a hard time hearing you. I'm sorry. I was trying to help. But we are 1 minute over, and I want to respect everyone's labor and time. And thank you so much, Cedric, Jahari, Sandra, for your incredible wisdom. Heather, for yours. Thank you for the wonderful questions. Shannon and Jess, thank you for the incredible interpretation skills. To everyone who made tonight possible, all the behind the scenes labor, you all are incredible. Thank you so much. Please plan to join us Wednesday, October 20th, 5 to 6:30 p.m. Central Time for the second event in this series. The title is Critical Pedagogy and the Prison Classroom. And we will have Heather Kenwell as one of the panelists, Craig Hardaway, an Education Justice Project alum, and I believe Jason LaFountain, who teaches with PNAP. So we will be sending you emails. We look forward to seeing you. Thank you for starting this conversation and can't wait to continue it in a couple of weeks. Be safe.
I love you,
Thank
Sandra Brown. I love you, Heather Kenwell. Welcome home, Cedric.
Thank you. Yeah, just give them love. Thank you so much.